Hi, my name is Gina McGovern. I'm going to give you a lesson today in adolescent brain development. Today's lesson is going to have three main parts. First is a stimulation simulation. Then I'll provide an interactive lecture on brain development, and we'll do some application to the adolescent experience. So for this simulation, we're going to try to memorize a list of 80s movies. First, I'm going to show them to you one at a time in a certain order, and then you'll try to name the next movie as I show you each one. So get ready. Gremlins, Goonies, Jaws, Pretty in Pink, The Karate Kid, Indiana Jones, Teen Wolf, E.T. Got it? So you've got the order now. We're going to go through again, and I want you to try to name the next movie as I pull each one up. They're in the same order as they were before. All right, how did you do? Were you able to guess them all? Let's see if you can do even better this time, okay? I might pick up the pace a little bit, but again, see if you can predict what is the next movie to come up in the list. All right, one more time. This time you're going to be awesome. One extra thing though. When you see this yellow star on the page, you're going to yell at the top of your lungs, "Sugar! Sugar! Sugar! Sugar!" Let's talk about it. What made that exercise challenging? Think about that for a few seconds. It could have been remembering a long string of things. There were 8 items in that list. It could have been lack of familiarity with the content. Maybe you aren't familiar with 80s movies, especially during the first round when you weren't sure what was going to come up. It could have been the speed, it got faster as we went, or the pressure of a performance task, doing something that you knew someone else was watching. Or interruption by the star and the subsequent yell that followed could have interrupted your thinking. Let's also talk about any strategies that you use to handle that challenge. Think about this for a few seconds. Maybe you used visual cues, like the location of the posters on each slide, or you shortened the names of the movies to make them easier to remember. You might have grouped a few of the posters into a shorter sequence, like maybe the first 2 or 3, and then the last couple you might have memorized easier. Maybe you wrote them down. There was no rules against that. Or it could have been just practicing over and over again that got them into your head. There are 2 parts of your brain that we activated in that activity, and both of them continue to develop in adolescence. But before we discuss the functions of those 2 in particular parts, I'm going to tell you the story of how your brain developed. When you were a baby, your brain went through a period of extreme growth. Your brain exploded as new gray matter developed as you learned things like your first words, how to walk, etc. And then, about the time that you entered school and throughout your childhood, your brain went through a process of pruning as you reinforced certain concepts and lost the material that you didn't use. Synapses between parts of your brain thicken as you made connections, like when a baby discovers, when I move the muscles in my hand, I can grab hold of things, or when you start to learn to read and write and you make connections between the written symbols and the auditory sounds and the meaning that they hold. During adolescence, you go through another intensive period of growth and pruning, particularly in 2 areas of the brain, and one of these areas typically develops sooner than the other, which creates possibility but also creates risk for adolescents. So the amygdala, which is sensitive to emotions and seeks dopamine, is responsible for sensory input. It's the part of the brain that we lit up in the simulation we did at the start of the lesson, especially as we called out the pictures. It's what encourages risk-taking in order to get that dopamine response, which you might have felt when you got the picture order correct, or when you let yourself go and you yelled "sugar" at the top of your lungs. The other area of the brain which is developing during adolescence is the prefrontal cortex. It's responsible for planning, decision-making, and delayed gratification. If you enabled some strategies during the last few rounds of the picture game, you were engaging your prefrontal cortex. It tends to develop later than the amygdala. It may not fully develop until the mid-20s, whereas the amygdala is seeing activity by the early teens. So during adolescent brain development, the amygdala, which is a dopamine-seeking center, develops first, and the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for decision-making ability, develops later. What could possibly go wrong in this situation? Let's think about it. So try and share a time where you or a young person you know exhibited a heightened sensitivity to dopamine and an inhibited decision-making ability. In a previous time I did this lesson, I had a student share an example where he and his brother were shooting BB guns at each other when they were about 13 years old. We want to also think about what effects this combination might have for young people and what supports adults might provide. So consider this for a moment. So it's not necessarily all bad. The heightened emotional sensitivity of adolescence means that there's an opportunity for them to develop empathy and perspective taking. They might become active in addressing social issues that they're passionate about, that sort of thing. But there are risks of engaging in behaviors that could harm their development, such as drug and alcohol use or unsafe sex. One way that adults can provide support is to scaffold youth thinking through the potential consequences of their actions. But it's important that adults respect youth's autonomy while they offer support and withhold their judgment. Adults can also support youth after they engage in risk behavior by listening to youth as they process their experiences. Adults should only offer advice when it's asked for. In conclusion, the adolescent's developing brain creates increased potential for emotional expression and agency, but adolescents may need support in decision-making as the functions of the prefrontal cortex catch up to the drives of the amygdala. If you could, please type into the chat box what you learned about adolescent brain development today. Thanks so much. Contact me with any questions.